Nobody dared to save this dying puppy, except for one man. On a freezing night, when everyone else turned away, he opened his door, and what happened next was beyond belief. This wasn't just a helpless little animal, it carried a secret that would drag him into a dangerous fight he never asked for. Suddenly, a simple act of kindness puts his life on the line, exposing dark truths powerful people would do anything to hide. From a lonely roadside worker to the only person standing between justice and corruption, his world is about to explode. But the real question is, what did this tiny, fragile puppy know that made saving it the most dangerous choice of his life? This space is built on something simple and enduring: the power of love, the truth in kindness, and the belief that quiet care can still change lives. The winter wind howled through the bare branches outside Hollis Greer's small house, its lonely sound matching his mood perfectly. At 52 years old, he had grown accustomed to quiet nights alone, with only the occasional emergency call breaking the silence. His tow truck sat waiting in the driveway, a constant reminder of the countless stranded motorists he'd helped. Over the years, Hollis sat in his worn leather recliner, absently rubbing his calloused hands together for warmth. The television droned on in the background, some late-night show he wasn't really watching. The temperature had dropped below freezing hours ago, and ice was starting to form on his windows, creating delicate patterns that caught the dim light. From his porch lamp, scratch, scratch. The sound was so faint at first that Hollis thought he might have imagined it. But there it came again, more urgent this time. Something was at his front door. Scratch, scratch. Rising from his chair with a grunt, Hollis approached the door cautiously. Living alone in rural Missouri had taught him to be careful about unexpected visitors, especially at night. The scratching grew more frantic as he reached for the handle. When he pulled the door open, Hollis had to look down to find the source of the noise. There, shivering on his welcome mat, was a small puppy. The poor thing was covered in mud from head to tail, its fur matted and dripping with icy water. Its big brown eyes looked up at Hollis with a desperation that tugged at his heart. "Well, where did you come from, little fella?" Hollis muttered, scanning the darkness beyond his porch. No other animals or people were in sight. Just this lone pup, trembling in the cold. Before he could decide what to do, the puppy darted between his legs and into the house. "Hey now!" Hollis called out, shutting the door quickly to keep the bitter cold at bay. But instead of making itself at home or looking for food like he expected, the puppy ran straight toward his attached garage door, pawing at it frantically and whining. Something about the dog's behavior made the hair on the back of Hollis's neck stand up. He'd worked with machines long enough to trust his instincts when they told him something was wrong. The puppy's distress seemed too specific, too targeted. All right, he said, opening the garage door. The puppy shot through immediately, heading straight for the far corner where Hollis kept his tools and spare parts. The dog began scratching at the wall near the floor, whining even louder now. Hollis flipped on the garage lights and followed, his nose catching something that made his stomach drop. The faint but distinctive smell of propane. Getting down on his hands and knees beside the puppy, he could now hear a soft hissing sound coming from behind the wall panel. "Oh hell," he breathed, suddenly understanding. The propane line that fed his garage heater ran through that wall. With shaking hands, he pulled away the access panel, and his worst fears were confirmed. The line had developed a significant leak, filling his garage with the dangerous gas dot moving as quickly as his stiff joints would allow. Hollis scrambled to the main valve and shut it off. The hissing stopped immediately, but his heart continued to race as he realized what could have happened. One spark, one small electrical arc from his tools or equipment, and the whole place could have gone up in flames with him in it. He stood there for a moment, leaning against the wall as the reality of the situation sank in. Then he looked down at the mud-covered puppy, who sat watching him with those soulful brown eyes. "You just saved my life, didn't you?" he said softly. The puppy's tail wagged, spreading little drops of mud across the concrete floor. Hollis felt something shift inside him, a warming of his heart that he hadn't experienced in years. This tiny creature had appeared out of nowhere and prevented what could have been a deadly disaster. The coincidence seemed too perfect to be just chance. "Come on," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Let's get you cleaned up and warm." In his bathroom, Hollis gently washed the mud from the puppy's fur using warm water and an old towel. As the dirt washed away, he could see the dog's true coloring, a beautiful mix of brown and black with white paws. It was still shivering, but seemed to trust him completely, standing patiently in the tub as he worked. "You're just a little thing, aren't you?" Hollis murmured as he dried the puppy off. "Can't be more than a few months old." The dog responded by licking his hand, causing an unexpected smile to cross his weathered face. After the bath, Hollis found an old blanket and made a makeshift bed in the corner of his kitchen. He scrounged up some leftover chicken from his dinner and put it in a small bowl, along with some water. The puppy ate eagerly but kept looking up at him between bites, as if making sure he was still there. Settling back in his recliner, Hollis watched the puppy explore its new surroundings. His house hadn't felt this alive in years, not for a long time. The television was still on, but he wasn't paying attention to it anymore. His mind was on the miracle that had just occurred, how this small, homeless creature had somehow known exactly where to lead him, exactly what danger lurked behind his walls. The puppy finished its investigation of the living room and trotted over to Hollis's chair. Without hesitation, it curled up at his feet, releasing a contented sigh. Hollis felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Guess you're staying, huh?" he said quietly. The puppy's only response was to snuggle closer to his foot. Outside, the wind continued to howl, and ice continued to form on the windows. But inside, something had changed. The house didn't feel quite so empty anymore. Hollis reached down and gently patted the puppy's head, marveling at how this small act of kindness, opening his door to a creature in need, had resulted in his own life being saved. As he sat there, listening to the puppy's soft breathing, Hollis couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a chance encounter. Something had brought this dog to his door tonight. Something had guided it to that propane leak. Whether it was luck, fate, or divine intervention, he knew one thing for certain: his life would never be quite the same again. The ticking of his wall clock marked the passing minutes as Hollis sat there, lost in thought. He knew he should probably try to find out if anyone was missing a puppy, but part of him hoped no one would claim it. For the first time in longer than he could remember, his house felt like it might become a home again. Finally, the events of the evening caught up with him, and Hollis felt his eyes growing heavy. The puppy was already fast asleep at his feet, looking peaceful and secure. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and decisions, but for now, this was enough: a cold night, made warm by an unexpected guardian angel in the form of a mud-covered puppy. Rising carefully so as not to disturb his new companion, Hollis did one final check of the propane line, making sure the valve was completely shut off. He'd have to call someone to repair it properly in the morning, but for now, the danger had passed. As he switched off the garage light, he looked back at the wall where the leak had been and shuddered slightly, thinking about what might have happened if that puppy hadn't shown up when it did. Back in the living room, the puppy had followed him and was looking up expectantly. "All right," Hollis said with a slight smile. "Just for tonight, you can sleep in my room." He didn't really believe his own words. He already knew this arrangement would last far longer than just one night. As he prepared for bed, Hollis couldn't help but marvel at how quickly life could change. Just hours ago, he had been alone, going through the motions of another solitary evening. Now he had a purpose again, even if that purpose was just caring for a stray puppy that had somehow known exactly what he needed. The puppy settled into its blanket beside Hollis's bed, and he reached down to give it one final pat. "Thank you," he whispered, though the words seemed inadequate for what had transpired tonight. The puppy's tail thumped softly against the floor. In response, and Hollis felt a peace settle over him that had been missing for far too long. The harsh fluorescent lights of the all-night veterinary clinic made Hollis squint as he cradled the muddy puppy against his work jacket. The small black and white dog shivered, but not from cold anymore. He seemed anxious about being in this sterile environment. Hollis couldn't blame him. "Evening," called a slim woman with auburn hair tied back in a neat ponytail. She adjusted her glasses as she looked up from behind the front desk. "I'm Lark Henley. What brings you in so late?" Hollis cleared his throat. "Found this little fella at my door. Saved my life, if I'm being honest. Figured I owed him a checkup at least." He shifted uncomfortably under the bright lights, aware of how out of place his grease-stained clothes and work boots looked against the clean white tiles. Lark's sharp eyes softened as she looked at the puppy. "Let's get him scanned for a microchip first. Follow me to exam room 2. She led them down a short hallway, her practical shoes making no sound on the floor. The exam room was small but spotless. Lark patted the stainless steel table, and Hollis gently set the puppy down. The little dog pressed against his hand, seeking reassurance. "He seems to trust you already," Lark observed, reaching for a handheld scanner. She ran it over the puppy's shoulders and neck. The device beeped, and her expression changed. "That's strange. What is it?" Hollis asked, noting the sudden tension in her posture. Lark frowned at the small screen. "This registry code, it's linked to someone named Colette Ames. She was a vet tech who went missing 6 months ago." She typed quickly on the computer in the corner. "She worked at Wade Pritchard's kennels before she disappeared." Pritchard? The name rang a bell. The livestock auctioneer? Man's got his name on half the county fair buildings. "And his fingers in twice as many pies," Lark said quietly. Her face had gone pale. "Mr. Greer, this scan, it automatically notifies the registered owner when a chip is read, which means Wade Pritchard will know this puppy has been found." Hollis felt a chill that had nothing to do with his damp clothes. Why would that matter to a man like him? Lark glanced at the closed door before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "Colette tried to report something she saw at his kennels. The next day, she vanished. No trace. The police said she probably just left town, but," she shook her head, "everyone knows better than to ask questions about Wade Pritchard's business." The puppy pressed closer to Hollis, as if sensing the gravity of the conversation. Those bright eyes that had warned him about the gas leak now seemed to hold a deeper knowledge, or perhaps fear. "What are you saying?" Hollis asked, though. He was beginning to understand. "I'm saying you should leave that dog here. Let animal control handle it. Whatever this is," Lark gestured at the computer screen, "it's bigger than a lost puppy. Pritchard has friends in the sheriff's office, on the city council. He's not someone you want attention from." Hollis looked down at the small creature that had saved his life just hours ago. The puppy met his gaze steadily, tail giving a tentative wag. Something in Hollis's chest tightened, a feeling he hadn't experienced since losing his wife 5 years ago. "Can't do that," he said finally. "This little fella came to me for help. Wouldn't be right to turn my back on him now." "Mr. Greer." "Hollis," he corrected. "And I appreciate the warning, Miss Henley. But this pup risked everything coming to my door tonight. Least I can do is return the favor." He paused, studying her worried expression. "Though I wouldn't say no to any other information you might have about what's really going on at those kennels." Lark seemed to wage an internal battle before reaching for a notepad. "I can't tell you much, but I know someone who might." She scribbled down an address. "Be careful who you trust with this. And watch your back. Pritchard doesn't like people poking around in his business." As if to emphasize her point, headlights swept across the clinic's front windows. Lark quickly tucked the puppy into Hollis's jacket. Use the back door. Go now. Hollis didn't argue. He clutched the precious bundle against his chest and followed Lark through a storage room to a rear exit. The cold air hit him like a slap, but the puppy stayed perfectly still and quiet in his arms. What should I call you, little friend? Hollis murmured as they hurried toward his truck. The dog's black and white markings in the darkness reminded him of something. Rook, maybe? Like that chess piece? The puppy's tail thumped against his ribs. Apparently, he approved. As Hollis started his truck, he caught sight of Lark watching from the doorway. She gave him a small nod before disappearing inside. In his arms, Rook settled more comfortably against his chest, and Hollis knew with absolute certainty that his life had just changed forever. Whatever storm was coming, they would face it together. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness as they pulled away from the clinic, leaving behind the safety of simple answers for a road that promised only questions and danger. But as Hollis felt Rook's steady heartbeat against his own, he couldn't bring himself to regret a single moment of this strange night. The drive home from the veterinary clinic felt longer than usual to Hollis Greer. His headlights cut through the darkness of the rural Missouri night as the puppy dozed in the passenger seat, finally warm and clean after his examination. The clinic visit had left Hollis with more questions than answers, and Lark Henley's warnings about Wade Pritchard echoed in his mind. Back at his modest house, Hollis settled the puppy onto an old blanket near the heating vent. He'd barely had time to kick off his work boots when the crunch of tires on gravel caught his attention. Through the window, he spotted the distinctive light bar of a police cruiser. Deputy Rowan Fitch stepped out, his badge catching the porch light as he approached. Even at this late hour, his uniform was crisp, his smile practiced and unwavering. He rapped his knuckles against the doorframe with measured precision. "Evening, Hollis," Deputy Fitch said when the door opened. His voice was smooth as honey, but his eyes were cold. "Heard you picked up a stray tonight. Need to have a word about that." Hollis positioned himself in the doorway, blocking the view. Inside, "Kind of late for a house call, isn't it, Deputy?" "Chain of custody matters don't keep office hours," Fitch replied, still wearing that manufactured smile. "That animal's connected to an ongoing investigation. Need you to surrender it to proper authorities." The puppy appeared between Hollis's legs, letting out a low growl. Something in the dog's reaction reinforced Hollis's growing unease. "Got any paperwork for that?" Hollis asked, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Warrant, maybe?" Fitch's smile tightened. "Come on now, Hollis. We both know how things work around here. Wade Pritchard's got a legitimate claim on that animal. Best not to complicate matters." "Pritchard?" Hollis crossed his arms. "Funny, the chip registration mentioned someone else entirely. Colette Ames ring any bells?" The deputy's facade cracked, for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. "You're making a mistake here, Hollis. Sometimes the smart play is just going along to get along." "Well, then I guess I ain't too smart," Hollis replied. "Because this dog stays with me until I see some legal documentation saying otherwise." Fitch's practiced politeness vanished entirely. "You really want to paint a target on your back? Over some mutt? We done here, Deputy." "Oh, we're just getting started." Fitch turned on his heel, his boots clicking against the porch boards. "Sleep tight, Hollis, while you can." Hollis watched the cruiser's taillights disappear down the road, his stomach churning. The puppy pressed against his leg, no longer growling, but still alert. Looking down at those trusting eyes, Hollis knew he'd made the right choice, even if it wasn't the easy one. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his armchair, watching the darkness through his window, the puppy curled in his lap. Around 3 in the morning, he had to make a run to his truck for his forgotten phone charger. The sound came first, a sharp crack that echoed across the yard. Then the spider web of broken glass spreading across his truck's windshield. Hollis dove behind the vehicle as a second shot pinged off the hood. The puppy, who had followed him out, barked furiously from the safety of the porch. Heart pounding. Hollis stayed low, counting the seconds until he heard a car engine roar to life in the distance. Only then did he make a break for the house, scooping up the puppy as he rushed inside. They huddled together in the darkened kitchen, both breathing hard. "Guess that was our warning shot," Hollis muttered, his hand shaking as he pulled out his phone to document the damage. The puppy licked his other hand, and Hollis felt a surge of protective anger. "Don't worry, buddy. They'll have to do a lot worse than that to scare us off." But as the adrenaline faded, the reality of his situation sank in. He'd somehow stumbled into something bigger and darker than a simple lost dog. Wade Pritchard had enough influence to send a deputy to his door in the middle of the night, enough power to arrange warning shots without fear of consequences. And now Hollis had placed himself squarely in their crosshairs, looking down at the puppy, who had finally dozed off against his leg. Hollis knew there would be no backing down. Whatever storm was coming, they would face it together. Hollis couldn't shake the unease that followed him after the confrontation with Deputy Fitch. The next morning, he drove straight to the veterinary clinic, the puppy curled up in the passenger seat. The events of the past 24 hours felt like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite fit together. Lark Henley was already at work when he arrived, her auburn hair tied back as she sorted through patient files. Her eyes widened at his return, quickly ushering him and the puppy into a back office. "I figured you'd be back," she said, closing the door behind them. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled up a chair. "There's something you need to know about Wade Pritchard and why that puppy finding you wasn't an accident." Hollis settled into the chair across from her, the puppy alert at his feet. "What do you mean, wasn't an accident?" Lark took a deep breath, her shoulders tight with tension. "Pritchard runs what he calls a specialty breeding operation out at his property. But that's just the surface. Behind all the show dogs and fancy kennels, he's running something much darker, a dog fighting ring. The ones that don't make the cut," she swallowed hard. "They're cold." The puppy pressed closer to Hollis's leg, as if sensing the gravity of the conversation. Hollis felt his stomach turn. "And Colette Ames?" The vet tech whose name came up on the chip? She started noticing things when Pritchard would bring dogs in for treatment. Suspicious injuries. Too many deaths written off as accidents. Lark's voice dropped lower. She gathered evidence, tried to report it. Then she just vanished 3 months ago. Hollis leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped together. "And this little guy, where does he fit in?" "We think he was part of a special training program." Lark reached down to gentle pat the puppy's head. Pritchard was experimenting with breeding dogs that could detect danger, gas leaks, structural weaknesses, things that could be exploited in fighting pits. But this one, she smiled sadly, he was different. More perceptive, maybe too smart for their purposes. The pieces started clicking into place in Hollis's mind. The puppy appearing exactly when he needed him. The warning about the gas leak. "You're saying he escaped?" "Not just escaped," Lark said, meeting his eyes. "We think he was helped. There are still people inside Pritchard's operation who want the truth to come out. They would have known about you, Hollis. Everyone around here knows about how you stood up to the mining company when they tried to force old Williams off his land. How you testified against your own cousin when he was running those insurance scams." Hollis sat back, processing this information. The puppy, Rook, he'd started calling him, looked up at him with those intelligent eyes. "They sent him to me because they knew I wouldn't back down." "Even when Pritchard's men try to scare you off," Lark confirmed. She hesitated, then reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. "I've been gathering my own evidence. Colette wasn't the only one who noticed things. I've documented everything I could, dates, injuries, suspicious deaths. But I couldn't do anything with it, not alone. Why are you telling me all this? Now? Hollis asked, though he already knew the answer. Because that puppy chose you, Hollis. And because I've watched Pritchard destroy too many lives while everyone looked the other way. Her voice strengthened with resolve. He's my father, and I've carried the guilt of staying quiet for too long. But now with you involved, maybe. We finally have a chance to stop him. Rook stood up, placing his paw on Hollis's knee, as if confirming his choice. Hollis looked down at this small creature who had saved his life, understanding now the weight of responsibility that had been placed on both their shoulders. It won't be easy, Lark warned. Pritchard has connections everywhere, police, local, government, even judges. That's how he's gotten away with it for so long. Easy stopped being an option the moment this little fellow showed up at my door, Hollis replied, his voice firm. Someone's got to stand up for what's right. Might as well be us. The morning sun filtered through the clinic windows, casting long shadows across the floor. In the quiet of that back office, an unlikely alliance had formed, a world-weary tow truck driver, a guilt-ridden daughter, and a remarkable puppy who had brought them together. The truth about Pritchard's operation was finally coming to light, and with it, the first real chance of justice for Colette Ames and countless others who had suffered in silence. There's something you need to know about Wade Pritchard, Lark said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. She glanced nervously at the door before continuing. He runs a dog fighting ring, but it's worse than that. The ones that don't make the cut. She stopped, swallowing hard. They're culled. Murdered. Hollis felt his stomach turn as he watched. Rook, now curled protectively at his feet. The puppy's intelligent eyes seemed to hold secrets of his own. Colette Ames worked here as a vet tech, Lark continued. She started noticing patterns. Too many dogs coming in with fighting wounds. Strange registration numbers. Then one day, she just disappeared. Lark's hands clenched into fists. Nobody asked questions. Nobody dared. The puppy's head suddenly lifted, ears perked toward the window. Hollis followed his gaze, noticing how focused and alert Rook had become. That's not normal puppy behavior, Lark observed. He's been trained to detect danger. I think he escaped from Pritchard's compound. And I don't think it was random that he found you, Hollis. What do you mean, people talk? They know you're one of the few who won't look the other way when something's wrong. Maybe Colette, Lark's voice trailed off. Maybe she trained him to seek help, to find someone who would listen. Hollis considered this as he watched Rook pace near the window, clearly agitated about something. He led me to that propane leak, saved my life. Then let's follow his lead, Lark suggested, grabbing her coat. See where he takes us. They left. In Hollis's tow truck, with Rook in the middle seat. The puppy grew increasingly alert as they drove north of town, toward an area of abandoned farm properties. When they passed an old grain silo, Rook began whining and pawing at the window. Circle back, Lark said. I think he's trying to tell us something. Hollis turned the truck around, parking at the base of the weathered silo. The structure loomed above them, its metal sides rusted and dented. Rook jumped out as soon as the door opened, trotting purposefully toward a gap in the silo's base. Hold on, Hollis said, reaching into the truck. He pulled out his heavy-duty flashlight and an old band radio he kept for emergencies. Years of roadside assistance had taught him to always be prepared. They followed Rook into the darkness of the silo. The puppy's nose worked overtime, sniffing at specific spots on the concrete floor. Hollis's flashlight beam revealed scattered dog food, water bowls, and what looked disturbingly like dried blood stains. They used this place, Lark whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Recently, too. A crackle from the band radio made them both jump. Through the static, they heard Deputy Fitch's voice. Subjects headed north on County Road 12, approaching the old Whitaker property. Lark's face went pale. That's here. He's telling them where we are. We need to move, Hollis said, already heading for the truck. But something in Rook's behavior made him pause. The puppy wasn't following. Instead, he was scratching at a specific spot near the wall. We don't have time, Lark urged, but Hollis was already shining his light where Rook indicated. There, partially hidden under debris, was a woman's ID badge. The photo showed a smiling young woman with Colette Ames, veterinary technician. Printed beneath. The radio crackled again with approaching vehicles. They rushed back to the truck, evidence in hand, but Hollis knew they'd stayed too long. As they sped away, he could see dust clouds rising from multiple directions in his rearview mirror. The chase back to town was tense, with Hollis taking back roads and detours to lose their pursuers. When they finally pulled into his tow yard, the relief was short-lived. Black smoke billowed from his garage, flames licking at the night sky. His entire livelihood was going up in flames. No, Hollis breathed, watching helplessly as fire consumed the building. 20 years of work, his tools, his backup truck, all of it burning. Lark grabbed his arm, preventing him from running toward the inferno. It's too late, she said, tears in her eyes. They wanted to send a message. Rook pressed against Hollis's leg, offering silent comfort as they watched the fire department arrive. Deputy Fitch's patrol car rolled up moments later, his face a mask of false concern. Terrible accident, Fitch said, approaching them. Electrical fire, most likely. These old buildings, you know how it goes. Hollis met the deputy's gaze, seeing the truth behind the man's calm smile. This was Pritchard's warning, delivered through his corrupt enforcer. The message was clear: back off, or worse will follow. As they stood in the glow of the flames, Hollis felt something hardening inside him. They'd taken his garage, his equipment, his security, but they'd also shown their hand. Fitch's betrayal over the radio had confirmed what they were up against: a network of corruption that reached into law enforcement itself. The fire department worked to contain the blaze, but Hollis knew there would be nothing left to save. The heat of the flames felt like a fever against his skin, matching the anger building in his chest. Beside him, Rook remained vigilant, his eyes fixed on Deputy Fitch's retreating form. Lark's revelation about Pritchard's operation hung heavy. In the clinic's examination room, Hollis leaned against the wall, processing everything she'd told him about the dog fighting ring and Colette's disappearance. His weathered hands absently stroked Rook's fur as the puppy pressed closer to his leg. There's more, Lark said, removing her glasses and rubbing her eyes. She looked suddenly older, worn down by the weight of whatever she was about to share. I know all this because... She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. Wade Pritchard is my father. The words hit Hollis like a physical blow. He straightened up, studying her face with new eyes. Now that she'd said it, he could see traces of Pritchard in her features. The same determined set of the jaw, though hers spoke of resistance rather than dominance. I left home at 18, Lark continued, her voice tight with old pain. I couldn't stand watching what he did to those animals. The way he'd smile in church on Sunday morning, then spend Sunday afternoon watching dogs tear each other apart. Her hands trembled as she pushed her hair back from her face. He called it culling the weak, said it was nature's way. Hollis felt his mind racing, reassessing everything he knew about their situation. That's why you work here at the clinic, he said slowly. To help the animals he hurts. Lark nodded, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. I tried reporting him years ago, but he owns half the county officials, and the other half are too scared to cross him. The few who tried, she shook her head. They lost their jobs, their homes, some left town altogether. Rook whined softly, sensing the tension in the room. Hollis watched as Lark knelt down, letting the puppy sniff her hand. The gentleness in her touch told him everything he needed to know about where her loyalties truly lay. You understand what this means, she said, looking up at him. He won't just come after you now. He'll come after me too. His own daughter, helping expose his operation. It'll drive him crazy. Why tell me this? Hollis asked, though he already suspected the answer. Because you need to know what we're up against. Lark stood, squaring her shoulders. And because I want you to understand that I'm all in. This isn't just about doing what's right anymore. It's about stopping a monster I should have confronted years ago. Hollis nodded slowly, recognizing the courage it must have taken for her to share this truth. Her connection to Pritchard didn't make him trust her less. If anything, it proved how committed she was to their cause. Anyone willing to stand against their own blood for what's right deserved respect. The thing about my father, Lark continued, pacing the small exam room, is that he sees himself as untouchable. He spent decades building his reputation, his connections, the respectable businessman, the community leader. Her laugh was bitter. Nobody sees what happens behind those kennel doors. Nobody wants to see. Until now, Hollis said firmly. Until now, she agreed. But we need to be smart about this. He'll expect me to turn against him eventually. I'm the disappointment, the daughter who never lived up to his standards. But, she gestured to Hollis, you're the wild card. A simple tow truck driver who should have handed over that puppy and walked away. Hollis felt Rook press against his leg again, as if emphasizing why that had never been an option. Well, he said, a hint of his usual dry humor returning. I've been underestimated before. Comes in handy sometimes. Lark managed a small smile, but it faded quickly. We need to move fast. Now that Rook's chip has been scanned, Dad will know exactly where to look. And he won't waste time. The gravity of their situation settled over them both. They were no longer just two people trying to protect a dog. They were standing against a powerful man who'd spent years building an empire of cruelty. A man who would stop at nothing to protect his secrets. Your father, Hollis said carefully. He must have records somewhere, proof of what he's doing. Lark nodded. In his office at the kennels. But it's like a fortress, security cameras, armed guards disguised as maintenance workers. Getting in won't be easy. Good thing you've got someone with experience pulling off tough jobs, Hollis replied, patting his tow truck keys. Sometimes the best way through a fortress is to look like you belong there. They shared a look of understanding. The stakes had just gotten higher, but so had their resolve. Lark's connection to Pritchard didn't weaken their alliance, it strengthened it. She knew their enemy better than anyone, and her determination to stop him ran bone deep. Rook barked softly, as if adding his own vote of confidence to their plans. Looking down at the clever pup who'd started all this, Hollis couldn't help but wonder if this had been inevitable. Maybe Rook hadn't just found him by chance that icy night. Maybe, somehow, the dog had known exactly who to turn to, someone stubborn enough to stand his ground, and someone brave enough to face her own father's evil. Together, they might just have a chance at bringing Wade Pritchard's dark empire crumbling down. The night air bit cold and sharp as Hollis guided his tow truck down the narrow dirt road leading to the abandoned grain silo. The headlights were off with only the moon casting silver shadows across the rusted metal structure looming ahead. Beside him, Lark clutched her phone, ready to document everything they might find. You sure about this? Hollis asked, his voice barely above a whisper. In the back seat, Rook sat alert, ears perked forward. Lark nodded, her face set with determination. That silo's been abandoned for 15 years. No reason for my father's men to guard it unless they're hiding something. Hollis killed the engine 50 yards from the building. The massive cylindrical structure rose like a metal giant against the star-filled sky, its corrugated walls streaked with rust and weather stains. A heavy chain and padlock secured the main access door. Won't be quiet, Hollis warned, retrieving tools from his truck bed. The steel cable from his winch would make quick work of that door. but the noise would echo for miles. "We don't have a choice," Lark replied, already filming with her phone. "If Colette's evidence is anywhere, it's here." Hollis worked quickly, wrapping the cable around the door's handle and securing it tight. Back in the truck cab, he engaged the winch. The motor whirred to life, and the cable grew taut. Metal groaned against metal as pressure built. With a thunderous crack, the door ripped free. The sound echoed across the empty fields like a gunshot. Rook barked once, sharp and alert. "Quick now," Hollis urged, grabbing his heavy flashlight. They rushed forward into the darkness of the silo. The beam cut through years of dust, revealing stacked metal cages along the curved walls. Most were empty, but some held dogs, thin, scared creatures that shrank from the light. The smell of waste and fear hung thick in the air. "My God," Lark whispered, her phone camera sweeping across the scene. Her hands shook slightly as she documented each cage, each cowering animal. Hollis moved deeper into the space, his boots crunching on scattered straw and debris. Something about the floor seemed off. He stomped once, hearing a hollow echo. "There's something underneath." Together they found the edge of a large metal plate set into the concrete floor. With their combined strength, they managed to slide it aside, revealing a sloping ramp descending into darkness. "This is it," Lark said, her voice tight with emotion. "This is where they stage the fights." The underground space was larger than Hollis expected. A concrete room with chain-link fence dividers creating makeshift arena spaces. Old bloodstains darkened the floor. Scattered equipment told the story: breaking sticks, heavy chains, medical supplies that spoke of patch-up jobs rather than proper care. "Get everything," Hollis instructed as Lark filmed methodically. "Every detail matters." They worked there, way through the space, documenting everything. Above them, Rook's barking suddenly grew more intense. "We need to free these dogs," Lark said, already heading back up the ramp. "We can't leave them here." Hollis nodded, following her lead. Together they began opening cages, careful to avoid any sudden movements that might startle the frightened animals. Most of the dogs were too scared to move at first, but gentle coaxing brought them out. Lark's experience showed as she handled each one with calm efficiency. "My truck can hold them," Hollis said, watching as the freed dogs gathered in uncertain groups, "but we'll need to move fast." They worked quickly, leading dogs out in small groups. Some needed to be carried, too weak or injured to walk. Hollis's heart ached at their condition, thinking of Rook and how easily this could have been his fate. With the last dog loaded into the truck bed, Lark did one final sweep with her phone's camera. "We've got them," she said, her voice mixing triumph and disgust. "We've got the proof of everything he's done." Hollis surveyed their work. The empty silo stood open, its secrets exposed to the night air. The rescued dogs huddled together in Puja. His truck, their eyes reflecting the moonlight. For the first time since finding Rook at his door, he felt they might actually win this fight. "Let's get these animals to safety," he said, helping Lark into the truck cab. "Then we'll figure out our next move." As they pulled away from the silo, Hollis caught a glimpse of Lark's face in the dashboard lights. Despite the victory, there was something in her expression that reminded him of the weight she carried, having to stand against her own father for what was right. Rook settled between them, his presence a reminder of how this had all started. One small dog, leading them to uncover something much bigger. The evidence was secured, the animals saved, but Hollis couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The truck rumbled down the dark road, carrying its precious cargo toward safety. Behind them, the exposed silo stood as a testament to what people could accomplish when they chose to stand up against cruelty, no matter the cost. The crunch of gravel shattered their moment of triumph. Headlights suddenly flooded the silos. Entrance, harsh beams cutting through the darkness. Hollis's heart sank as he recognized the familiar outline of Deputy Fitch's patrol car, followed by Wade Pritchard's gleaming black pickup truck. "Get behind me," Hollis whispered to Lark, pushing her toward the shadows. Rook pressed against their legs, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Deputy Fitch emerged first, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. "Well now, what do we have here?" His polite tone couldn't mask the menace beneath. "Breaking and entering's a serious offense, Hollis." Wade Pritchard stepped out next, his tall frame casting a long shadow. Even in the dim light, his pressed denim and polished boots looked immaculate. He carried a red gas can that sloshed ominously with each step. "You really should have minded your own business," Pritchard said, his voice calm as he began splashing accelerant around the silo's entrance. The sharp smell of gasoline filled the air. Some folks just won't learn. Fitch moved quickly, cuffing Hollis's hands behind his back before he could react. The steel bit into his wrists as the deputy roughly pushed him toward the patrol car. "You can't do this," Lark shouted, stepping forward. "There's evidence here." "Not for long, daughter," Pritchard cut her off, continuing to spread the gasoline. "Sometimes the only way to deal with rats is to smoke them out." A metallic clang echoed through the silo as something rolled across the concrete floor. Hollis turned to see a bright flare tumbling down the underground ramp, its sparks dancing against the walls. In seconds, flames erupted, following the trail of accelerant and racing toward the tunnels below. Lark's scream pierced the night. She and Rook had retreated deeper into the silo, but now found themselves trapped behind a warped metal grate that blocked their escape route. Smoke began billowing up from below, thick and black. "Help!" Lark coughed, pushing against the grate. "It's stuck." Hollis didn't hesitate. Even with his hands cuffed, he shoulder-checked Deputy Fitch, knocking the surprised lawman off balance. Racing to his tow truck, he managed to hook the winch cable to his cuffs. With a sharp yank, the chain snapped. Heat blasted his face as he sprinted back into the silo. Smoke stung his eyes, but he could make out Lark and Rook trapped behind the twisted metal barrier. The fire roared below, feeding on wooden kennels and years of accumulated debris. "Stand back," Hollis shouted, wrapping the tow cable around the grate. He ran to the truck, jumped in, and gunned the engine. The cable went taut, metal screaming against metal. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. Then with an ear-splitting crack, the grate tore free. Lark stumbled through the opening, Rook tight against her heels. Hollis grabbed her arm, pulling them both toward fresh air as flames licked up the silo walls. They emerged into the cool night. Coughing and gasping outside, Deputy Fitch had his weapon drawn but looked uncertain, glancing between Hollis and Pritchard. The kennel owner's face had turned dark with fury as he watched his secret operation going up in flames. "You'll regret this," Pritchard snarled, but the approaching wail of sirens made him pause. Someone had seen the fire and called emergency services. His carefully constructed world was about to face the light of day. Hollis held Lark close as she trembled, Rook pressing against their legs. The fire painted everything in flickering orange light, reflecting off the tears streaming down Lark's soot-stained face. They watched as Pritchard and Fitch retreated to their vehicles, tires spitting gravel as they fled into the night. The silo burned like a torch against the dark sky, years of cruelty and secrets turning to ash. Hollis's chest ached from smoke and exertion, but he stayed standing, supporting Lark as she caught her breath. They had survived, but the night's battle had nearly cost them everything. Through the chaos, Rook remained vigilant, his ears forward and nose testing the wind. The small dog who had started it all by scratching at Hollis's door that frozen night had led them here, to this moment of reckoning. As fire trucks approached in the distance, their red lights painting the countryside, Hollis knew their fight was far from over. But for now, they were alive, together, and the truth could no longer be buried in darkness. Smoke billowed through the silo as the flames spread rapidly. Through the haze, Hollis could see Lark and Rook trapped behind the warped grate, panic clear on their faces. Despite his cuffed hands, he knew he had to act fast. "My tow cable," he shouted to Lark over the roar of the fire. "The controls in." "My pocket." While Fitch was distracted by the growing inferno, Hollis managed to work the remote from his back pocket. The cable whirred to life, extending from his truck outside. With precise timing, he maneuvered it through the doorway and against the grate. The metal groaned and sparked as it gave way, creating an escape route for Lark and Rook. But as they rushed toward safety, Pritchard emerged from the smoke wielding a cattle prod, its electric arc crackling menacingly. "Not so fast," he snarled, blocking their path. His silver hair reflected the orange glow of the flames, making him look almost demonic. Hollis didn't hesitate. He charged forward, shoulder first, knocking Pritchard off balance. The impact sent them both stumbling onto a rusty catwalk above the burning lower level. Even with his hands cuffed, Hollis managed to keep his footing on the deteriorating steel. "Grating. You're nothing but a nobody mechanic," Pritchard spat, regaining his stance. "You think you can take down what I've built?" He jabbed the cattle prod forward, missing Hollis by inches as sparks showered down into the flames below. Hollis backed away strategically, drawing Pritchard further onto the weakened section of catwalk. He could feel the metal swaying beneath their weight, hear the ominous creaking of corroded bolts. "A nobody who exposed your whole operation," Hollis shot back, his voice steady despite the heat and smoke. "Those animals deserved better. Colette deserved better." Pritchard's face twisted with rage. He lunged forward with the cattle prod. But Hollis was ready. He sidestepped the attack, then threw his whole body against the catwalk's railing. The already compromised structure couldn't take the strain. With a thunderous crack, the section beneath Pritchard's feet gave way as the steel collapsed. Pritchard dropped the cattle prod and desperately grabbed for the remaining edge of the catwalk. His fingers found purchase, leaving him dangling above the inferno below. Despite everything, Hollis couldn't let him fall. He dropped to his knees, extending his cuffed hands toward Pritchard. "Take my hands," Hollis shouted through the smoke. For a moment, their eyes met. Then Pritchard's lips curved into a cruel smile. Instead of reaching for help, he swung the cattle prod one final time, striking Hollis's outstretched hands. The shock forced Hollis to recoil, and in that instant, Pritchard's grip failed. His scream echoed through the silo as he plummeted into the flames below. Outside, Deputy Fitch had seen enough. He sprinted for his patrol car, keys fumbling in his shaking hands. But before he could escape, a convoy of state police vehicles roared into the lot, lights flashing and sirens wailing. Lark had managed to call for help using Hollis's old band radio, and now justice was finally arriving. Fitch raised his hands in surrender as state troopers surrounded him, their weapons drawn. The corrupt deputy's carefully maintained facade crumbled as he was cuffed and read his rights. His polite smile was gone, replaced by the true face of a man who had sold his badge to the highest bidder. Through the smoke and chaos, Hollis emerged from the burning silo with Lark and Rook beside him. They watched as firefighters arrived to battle the blaze, their hoses sending powerful streams of water into the structure. The night air was filled with the sound of sirens, shouted commands, and the crackle of flames being subdued. A state trooper quickly freed Hollis from his cuffs while paramedics checked them for injuries. Rook pressed against Hollis's leg, no longer the scared puppy who had shown up at his door, but a loyal companion who had helped expose a dark conspiracy. Lark touched Hollis's arm gently. "You tried to save him," she said softly, referring to her father, "even after everything he did." Hollis nodded, watching as the firefighters worked to contain the last of the flames. "Everybody deserves a chance to do the right thing," he replied, "even if they don't take it." The state police investigators were already gathering evidence from the scene, photographing the exposed dogfighting operation and collecting documents that had survived the fire. Fitch sat in the back of a patrol car, his head bowed, while other officers began the process of dismantling the corrupt network that had protected Pritchard's operation for so long. As dawn began to break over the Missouri countryside, the full scope of what they had uncovered was finally coming to light. The night's events had exposed not just a criminal enterprise, but the courage it takes to stand against evil, no matter the cost. The truth had emerged from the flames, and justice, though hard-won, had finally prevailed. In the days following the Silo fire, Pritchard's carefully constructed empire crumbled like a house of cards. State investigators uncovered decades of corruption, animal abuse, and financial crimes. Bank accounts were frozen, properties seized, and former allies rushed to make deals with prosecutors. The biggest breakthrough came 3 days later. Acting on information from seized documents, state police raided a remote hunting cabin. There, they found Colette Ames, alive, though weakened from her captivity. She had been held prisoner since attempting to expose Pritchard's operation months earlier. Her detailed records of animal abuse and illegal fights, hidden before her disappearance, provided the final evidence needed to seal the case. Deputy Fitch's indictment came swiftly. The grand jury took less than 2 hours to hand down multiple charges: conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and criminal facilitation. His polite mask had finally cracked, revealing the corrupt officer underneath. Standing in the charred remains of his tow yard, Hollis surveyed the damage. Everything he'd built over 20 years was gone: tools, equipment, records all destroyed in Pritchard's retaliatory fire. But as Rook pressed against his leg, tail wagging, Hollis felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. "We can rebuild," Lark said, joining him with coffee cups in hand. "Start fresh," Hollis nodded, accepting the warm cup. Already filed for a new business license yesterday. Thinking of expanding, maybe add an auto repair shop too. "I like the sound of that," Lark smiled. Her father's arrest had freed her from a heavy burden, allowing her to finally look forward instead of over her shoulder. That evening, sitting on his porch with Rook curled up beside him, Hollis stared at his phone. His son's number was on the screen, unchanged after 3 years of silence. Their last argument seemed trivial now, after everything that had happened. With a deep breath, he typed, "Been thinking about you. Maybe we could talk sometime?" The response came faster than he expected. "I'd like that, Dad." Hollis felt his throat tighten as he showed the message to Lark, who had become a constant presence in his life. She squeezed his shoulder gently, understanding the significance of this small step toward healing. The next morning, Hollis filed the official adoption papers for Rook. The puppy who had saved his life that icy night was now legally his companion. As he signed the documents, he realized how much had changed. His quiet, isolated existence had been transformed into something richer, filled with purpose, justice served, and the warmth of newfound family. The yard would be rebuilt. His relationship with his son would take time to repair. But with Rook's loyal presence and Lark's steadfast support, Hollis knew he had found something more valuable than what he'd lost: a second chance at living fully with an open heart. If something today spoke to the part of you that still believes in love, stay a while. Subscribe. I'll be here again tomorrow with another story worth feeling.